Welcome everyone to our evening seminar with Dr. Goldberg. My name is Mary Beth Kwapniewski, SCAN's Programming Director. And for those of us joining us tonight who are new to SCAN, SCAN stands for Senior Citizens Activities Network. We are a nonprofit located at the Monmouth Mall in Eatontown, New Jersey. We have been serving the seniors of Monmouth and Ocean County since 1988. So we hope that you would visit our website at www.scannj.org to learn a little bit more about us. And for this evening, you can put any questions you have in the chat box as Dr. Goldberg is presenting. And then at the very end, we will open it up for questions that you can ask directly to Dr. Goldberg as well. So without any further ado, Dr. Goldberg, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's kind of nice. I recently, my camera keeps slowing down. I apologize. I recently moved to Jersey City Medical Center. I was down at Monmouth Medical Center for about 10 years. And I moved to Jersey City Medical Center to grow the palliative care program there. So I have a very long history with SCAN and love doing lectures and interactions with all your members. So I'm really excited to still have this opportunity, even though I'm the hour north instead of the hour south to go down to SCAN. So thanks for being here tonight. This lecture series has been probably like a year plus, right, in the making. We've been talking about doing something like this for the members of SCAN and their loved ones to really have a comfortable environment to have a conversation about some things that most people are really kind of nervous about and don't really want to talk about, but that are really, really important for all of you who are active, healthy adults who are trying to get your life still going and doing stuff, and that's what SCAN exists. But still have the reality that we are the older generation and things might come up and we want to make sure to plan for our future. So I'm really excited that you're all here, and hopefully some of you brought your family members or loved ones or your partners to help open this conversation together with all of us. Okay. So I'm very open to questions, but we're going to hold them till the end so we can get through all the material, and then it should have plenty of time for us to ask some questions.
Okay, I'm going to share the PowerPoint. Okay, and if anyone can't hear the video, just raise their hand, but I did test it earlier tonight, so.
Okay. Oh, so I tell you about, that's my credentials, but I started my career as a geriatrician in New Jersey. I did my fellowship in New York at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. I went there for medical school too there, came back to New Jersey and did my residency at Robert Wood in internal medicine. And I worked in New Brunswick at St. Peter's University Hospital for about 5 or 6 years. And then I was at Monmouth until about 3 months ago. We were just talking about my kids. So I live in Highland Park. So I live in Monmouth in Middlesex County, although now I work north. Before I was working in Monmouth County, and I have 3 kids who are my second job. Eventually I'll be the sandwich generation, as many of you were at some point. Okay.
Do you mind if I listen to this here? You want me to go in the bedroom?
All right, hold on. We got to make sure that everyone's muted.
Okay, if I listen to it here.
Okay, so if you hopefully you learn a lot tonight, but I started with this slide because I wanted you to focus on this slide. I think this is probably the most important thing as we move forward for you all to remember, is that palliative care is not hospice. And why I'm saying that is because if you use them interchangeably, you kind of dilute the value of either one separately. So we're going to talk a little bit about what palliative care is, and we're going to talk a little bit about what hospice is, and how you kind of decide which one is right for you based on your situation. But what happens is that everyone's scared of the word hospice. Many people are. And then if they say that that's the same thing as palliative care, then we don't get the value of how palliative care can help you at much earlier stages in your health. So if nothing else, you remember that, not to use them interchangeably. You get to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay. Right.
Okay, so what is palliative care? So palliative care, it's an interdisciplinary team that aims to relieve suffering and improve quality of life of patients with advanced illness and their families. It's someone who has a chronic illness, but is looking to live with that chronic illness to help with symptoms. So if they're having some pain or otherwise, things that they want to allow them to have the quality of life that they had wanted for themselves, and to support their family members, and to identify and quantify their goals of care, how they want to direct their care, how they want their doctors, what they want the doctors to know about themselves. So as they're going to make more medical decisions about their health, they really understand who you are and help you inject that into their plan. Next slide. So this video, there are some, there's a little bit of graphic images in this, but this is really something to help us understand. This was actually taped at Mount Sinai where I trained. This is in the intensive care unit, but it really gives us a sense of what palliative care can be about. If you want to play it.
Today, more Americans die in hospitals than anywhere else, often after prolonged illness and many medical interventions.
What modern medicine is capable of doing is almost what 20 years ago was considered science fiction. Essentially, you can support pretty much every body system for years because you can keep their lungs breathing and keep their heart beating, keep their blood pressure up and keep their blood flowing. That suspended animation state goes on forever. And so the decisions at the end of life have become much more complicated for everyone involved.
So while, remember I just said that palliative care is not when at the end of life and about dying, what it is, the principle we're learning from this clip is that it's really not about what the doctors can do. It's about what they should do. And the should never be decided by the doctor. They should be giving you advice as to what they think is the best course of action and what your options are medically for what's going on with you. But they should never be the one deciding absolutely what the answer is. The should really needs to be discussed with the patient, their family members, to weigh the pros and the cons of the different options. Now, some people want this image, right? This is okay for some people, but for some people it's not. But if we're not having the conversation to know what's important for you and you're not sharing that with your family member, then a lot of things can happen around you. And if you don't want things to happen like that, you really have to start having this conversation earlier on before you're in this situation where it's really dire and you're being kept alive on machines in the ICU. Some people want it, and I'm not here to judge that that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I want to open this conversation so you're discussing with your loved ones and your doctors whether that's really what you want. Next slide. So what could be a goal of having palliative care, right? So important is that it's concurrent care with curative therapies. You could be doing anything, any treatment, any cancer treatment, any heart treatment, any treatment for any of your chronic illnesses and still have palliative care involved. And that's why it's not hospice, because we'll talk a little bit later, that's not what hospice is. So it helps patients and their families identify their goals of care. It improves communication, because what I find is that when there's this mismatch and no one's sitting down and spending the time to make sure you understand what they're saying, you're making really big life decisions without actually knowing all the details. And as you know, in anything in life, some people are planners, right? Some people have those pros and cons lists when they're trying to make any decision. Certainly serious medical decisions should have that same value applied. And then we talk about symptom management. Okay, next slide. So there's all different kinds of goals of care that might be for different people, right? Your goals of care, it balances on you as a person. It balances on the actual disease that you have and what options you may have. But someone's potential goals of care is to be cured of their disease. But someone may realize that that disease is a terminal illness and they just want to look toward things that would help them have a good death or relieve their suffering. Or what's really important is to maintain their function, that they want to be able to play with their grandchildren or be able to still work in the job that they love to do. So all those things are really important, but if you don't ask the question, we don't really know what's important to them as a person. What is a good day in your eyes that would be how you'd want to live your life if you could? Next. There's lots of symptoms that come up, right? It's not just pain at the end of life, or if I'm short of breath because I can't breathe anymore and I'm not going on a ventilator. There's all these things that could help be addressed, that can be addressed through a palliative care physician or a palliative care service that can help you get through the day, even if you have a chronic illness. And these will be different for every person. And I would probably say that they're probably all combined in some sense. And maybe one symptom is actually masking 15 other things that are going on in their lives. But when you're having an open conversation about it and you're looking toward help for it, all those things do come to light. Next slide. Okay, so this is another video that helps. Again, it's about end of life topic, but certainly gives you the sense of how someone can open this conversation to say, you know what, this is how I choose to live my life. It may not be how other people would choose it for me, but this is how you can be an advocate for yourself. So I think I cut off, there was a political statement, it was a newsreel. So I think I cut the video enough to avoid, but if it does have any political implications in the first few minutes, just please ignore it. It's really the rest of the video that's important.
Okay.
Nation, a very personal fight faced by many families over the end of life. Now, we know that most Americans want to die at home, but most of us meet our end in hospitals or in nursing homes. How that could change might begin with a tough talk about how we want to die.
My name is Joe Nyer, and I'm 47 years old. I was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme stage 4. It's the most dangerous brain cancer there is. And they give you, the median is 14 months from diagnosis. Standard protocol is for you to be on chemo kind of for life. That was 5 days on and 18 days off. I did the 5 days on it. So, pretty horrible for sure. And it took me 13 of those 18 days before I could really get off the couch and get back to being able to do what I love. Because for me, it's much more about quality of life than it is quantity. I opted to not continue the chemo protocol at all. It just was too much time of feeling horrible. And for very slim gain.
Joe spoke with his family, wife Lori, sons Alex, Aaron, and Zeke, and his brother David, making it clear to them how he wanted to be cared for and how he wanted to die.
If I got pneumonia or something like that, I would probably go to the hospital if it's a treatable condition, But if it's glioblastoma related, I definitely want to stay home. If it goes that route where, I know that the end's coming, I don't want to be away from here.
Saltwater pool.
I can see and feel people going, gosh, why is he not going to do everything he can? I am doing everything I can. I'm doing everything I think is best for everybody involved, myself and the family. And I knew for me, for Joe, that it was my way to go.
For me, my reaction to this video is that I know they say this is how he chose to die, but honestly, it's really how he chose to live, is that he can do the activities. He seems kind of normal, right? He's maybe a little thinner than we would expect someone of his age to be, but he's hanging out with his family. He's doing some woodwork in the backyard. He's having some snacks. Really seems to be kind of a normal day if we would take it as a snippet, right, in that image. And so although the topic that they're saying is that he's choosing how he would die, honestly, he's choosing how he wants to live, and that he decided that there was a risk and a balance that he was willing to take in order to have days where he wasn't so sick from all of his treatments. Now, yes, eventually that means that he would pass away from his illness, but he's choosing a pathway that was going to give him the quality of life that he wanted. And now it seems extreme, right, for him, because he does have an illness that will take his life eventually. But this doesn't have to be as extreme. It could be for any subtle illness, not as dramatic as this, is that there are just certain things that you decided that are important to you. And you want to be able to focus on those things rather than going to the hospital every time you don't feel well, or, being able to at least balance some of your life yes, in the end, you will die, but honestly, we're all going to die at some point. And so really, I see this video as that he choosing how he wants to live his life more than how he wants to die. Okay, next slide.
Nation, a very personal.
Okay, so there, in terms of palliative care, we talk about palliative care and how it kind of is engrossed in the medical care. So palliative care is a very young specialty. So there really isn't a lot, there are not a lot of palliative care providers throughout the country. We're kind of a young specialty. You have to have the certain kind of person who wants to do this. But in general, there is a push to educate all the new learners about principles of palliative care. And the old model of palliative care was probably only just a few generations ago, where doctors would do everything up until that point where they were so close to dying that they ramped up palliative care. And then it was really hospice, right? It wasn't really palliative care because they weren't helping them live. They were helping them die comfortably. Where we're trying to shift to the graph on the right, where there's ups and downs in the inclusion of palliative care in their healthcare team, that there are times when they need a little bit of more symptom management. And then when things calm down, they can kind of go to the background. And then as you have the ups and downs of their illness, they could be involved in the care as much or as little as they want. Now, of course, there would still be that spike as they get closer to the time of them passing, but it is a concurrent plan to have someone involved in your care to be able to help bring you back into this conversation. Okay, next slide. So we talked a lot about what palliative care is, right? So I'm a palliative care physician. I sat for a board and I am certified. I do it all day long. Now, unfortunately, I do it in an inpatient hospital environment, and almost all of the patients that I am talking about, unfortunately, are more toward the hospice realm, more than it truly is earlier on. And so my job, as how I'm trying to change the course of the hospital that I'm in, is that I am looking to bring palliative care earlier on in patients' care. So that way they have this opportunity to have conversations, to do some life planning, to help figure out how they want to live their life with their illness, rather than just talking about how they want to die. But you will get to some point, even if palliative care is involved on an earlier end, that you have to start thinking about the end of your days. And that's where hospice comes into play. So it is very different. Why? Because hospice is that we are taking care of someone who we estimate would likely pass away from their illness in the next 6 months. And everything we would do is all there to achieve the goals of care of comfort measures only. We are no longer looking for curative therapy, whether that's because it comes from the doctors or it comes from the patient themselves. The goals of care are to keep them out of the hospital and to keep them comfortable for whatever time that is. As the gentleman spoke in the video, right? He said he's not as worried about the quantity, he's more worried about the quality. But we're now taking in line of that we're not even looking toward any true treatment that's going to change the course of their illness. We have gone to the point where we've accepted that that's not possible. Okay, next slide. So I say estimate, right? Because it's not like this lightning strikes, and if you don't die at 6 months, you're no longer able to be on hospice. So it's really just a trend. And I say, how good we are guessing when someone's died? And I really do mean guessing, because we're not God or whatever being you believe is up there making these calls for us. Next slide. So when you say, when would I think about hospice? When should your doctor be thinking about hospice? And they call this the surprise question, right? But if and it actually is in medical literature about doctors asking themselves this question about their patients. And the question is would I be surprised if the disease took its natural course? Would I be surprised if the patient was alive in 6 months? If the answer was no, I would not be surprised. Yes, I would be surprised if they were alive in 6 months, meaning they would likely pass away. Then hospice is something you should start thinking about, whether medically it's appropriate, and then trying to see if it's within the confines of the goals of care for the patient and their loved ones. Okay, next slide. So how do we figure that out, right? How do we know if they're going to die at 6 months? Now, we don't know. We're guessing, right? We're giving our best prognosis guessing, but there are patterns as to how people will pass away from their illness. So the first slide we're looking at is someone who has dementia, right? Or failure to thrive, or there's nutritional deficits, things like that, frailty. Now, it's a little bit harder to guess because it's kind of this generalized decline over time. It is thought that someone who is diagnosed with dementia, it's usually an average about 6 to 8 years before they would get to a point where their dementia is so progressed that they would be eligible for hospice, that they would likely pass away soon. But it's really hard to know if for frailty and for dementia exactly when that time is to trigger. So a lot of it has to do with how they're functioning at home, how much support they need for their personal care, if they're losing weight, not being able to maintain their nutrition. And for memory loss, it's more of a point where they already need support for all their personal care. They're not speaking very much. They're not really walking very much. They're not really socially interacting with their loved ones around them. That's the point medically where someone would be appropriate for hospice for the dementia diagnosis alone. As opposed to the next slide, which is a very different pattern. So this is the pattern for someone who has cancer. And usually you're doing okay for quite a bit of time, whether that's the same medication, different treatments. And there is this inflection point where either the cancer itself is causing damage to other organs in your body because of the spread that's taking over, or the medications themselves are causing you to have some complications from the medications. So you get to this point where either the medical doctor, the oncologists are saying that they don't think that treatment has much benefit to you because it's only providing more harm because you're getting sick from the medication, but it's not controlling the cancer. Or you have chosen that whatever is happening with that treatment plan, you're not thinking that it would be included in your goals of care and the quality of life that you want. And soon after that, you would pass away pretty soon. So a very different pattern than someone who has more of the frailty, nutritional dementia. And yet a third pattern is our next slide, which is the pattern of someone who has different kind of organ damage. So if you have heart problems or kidney problems or liver problems, what happens is you kind of keep going along. You may have a blip where you have an acute problem where all of a sudden you start really sick or you go to the hospital. Now, sometimes you bounce back from that, right? And you get back to your baseline. But a lot of times, as you've kind of seen for yourself or your loved ones or your friends, is they don't really actually get back to their baseline. They kind of go to rehab, right? And they never really gain back all the function that they had prior to that first event. And they keep going along until the next time happens. And especially like for someone who has congestive heart failure, they may be up and down in the hospital, out of doctor's offices, in rehab for quite a few times. But at some point, there will be that time at the end where the disease and the organs that are affected are so declined that that person really can't bounce back. And so what our goal is to try to figure out, we don't want to wait till that time. Especially, like, remember that first slide, is if people really don't want to, pass away in the hospital. If what's important to them is that eventually when it would happen, they want to pass away in their home with family around them, you kind of have to plan for that. Because if you wait till that last event, you might be stuck in the hospital and not be able to get home. You may be too sick to get home. So having these conversations, knowing ahead of time, really, when's the point where you would say, that this is really not the life I wanted to live. And I don't want medications that are going to keep this body going if it's really not helping me be the person I want to be. You want to know that ahead of time so you can anticipate that problem and when to kind of trigger that. Okay, next slide. So now we say, okay, how are we good at it, right? So as some of you may have experienced with your own doctors, right? We are trained in medicine to not accept that people die, although unfortunately we all do. Right? And so part of this, why we do these kind of talks and why we've been talking that so long is because you may need to be your own advocate because the doctors may not offer this to you. They may be in such a focus that they want to keep going, giving you more treatments because there's that small possibility that maybe you're that 1%. But remember, that's only 1%. And so in training, we're not given the okay in medicine to say that this is okay, that for patients to say, I just don't want it. But I think it's even a braver decision to make is to say, I don't really want it because it's not me. It's not who I want to be. It's not how I want to live. And I think that's really a brave decision to make. And I support the people who say that. but I want them to be given the opportunity to say that. But in medicine, we're not really good at giving you this option, which is why we do a lot of these kind of forums so you can be your own advocate. Okay, next slide. So this is just illustrates that point. So this was a study, it was really kind of interesting, where doctors were asked when they estimated when they thought a patient of theirs might pass away. And then it compared it to the actual time of when their patient did pass away. And you see the dots are all over the place. The line is the time of when they passed, and the dots are where the doctor guessed. And it's all over the place. So even though we have all this training, we do lots of things. We may be a high-level doctor in a very big hospital, but we don't always know when someone is going to pass away. We can't always predict it. What's even more amazing is that all the patients enrolled in this study were all already enrolled in hospice. So someone had made a decision that they think that they would pass away in the next 6 months, likely, right? That surprise question. And still yet, even though we have that smaller, narrow time frame, we're still not really good at knowing exactly when someone is going to die. And so that's why hospice is intended to take care of people, not for the last moments of their life, is to provide the support for patients who are at that 6 month range, but that have made a choice that they personally don't want to be in and out of a hospital during that time. They want to do whatever they can at home and not go to the hospital and have aggressive care, knowing that it's likely that their body would shut down and they would pass away in that time frame. Okay, next slide. So why don't we talk about it, right? Why are doctors so bad at talking about it? And it's because we have all these other words to talk about death. So obviously I'm pretty comfortable about talking about it, and I don't know about all of you. If you want to share at the end, you can. But most people are scared to talk about it. But it's a reality that I wish I could change, right? I'd be really rich if I could, right? But I can't. And so if we can't openly communicate about this is a reality, then we can't take those steps further away from that time to talk about how I want to live my life if I'm closer to that time than I ever was before. We have to recognize that time, right? So we have all these other ways, just like the reason why palliative care and hospice are equated is because people are scared to say hospice, so they say palliative care, and then people think that palliative care is hospice. But we just learned that it's not, right? It's very, very different, okay? So euphemisms, that's what we're talking about. It's people being scared to talk about what really is going on with each other. So the next slide gives us some definitions as to when euphemisms are utilized, right? Why do we have euphemisms? Is because it protects us from something that we think is taboo, something that we think is a more positive way of talking about something that's happening. It takes off the burden from the person ahead of us because we're not talking directly to the issue at hand. And so we get to the place where then no one really knows what we're talking about, right? I mean, if you would never want to say to a kid who, God forbid, their parent passed away, that they went to sleep and they're never going to wake up, because that kid is never going to go to bed, right? So there are consequences to not realistically talking about these phrases, and creates an environment where we're not comfortable talking about what's most important to us. Next slide. So this is, it bears out in the politics, right? And that whether you're Republican or Democrat, I'm not going to even ask, and it doesn't really matter. But when Barbara Bush passed away, there was a whole big story about her, is that she really was on hospice, by the way, but the announcements in all the newspapers was that she was not seeking additional medical treatment with focus on comfort care. And I hate that phrase. Why do I hate that phrase? Because everyone should get comfort care. That's what palliative care is about, right? You can be going for cancer treatment and you should still getting comfort care. You should be going for choosing not to pursue medical treatment does not ipso facto mean that you're going on comfort care. We should be doing as doctors comfort care for everybody. But what the real message should be, and it has nothing to do because he's Democrat, is the next slide, is all in the news now, right? They're not saying Jimmy Carter is going on comfort care, right? Jimmy Carter is going on hospice. He's home so that when he passes away, he wants to be home with his family and he doesn't want to be at the hospital anymore. Now, we're many years away from when Barbara Bush passed away. And it could be that all of the injection of the creation of palliative care and the support that we have for palliative care in many of the hospital systems around the country is why this is the message today, where it wasn't when she was passing away. But it was refreshing. I actually sent this article to all my colleagues, right? Because we were finally getting the optics that our patients need, is that it's really okay to say that I don't want to spend the last days of my life on a machine in the hospital. I decided I've gone through lots of treatment. It's not like Jimmy Carter didn't go through treatment, right? He's not given up on his life. He did aggressive treatment for many of his medical illnesses. But at some point where his body was just overwhelmed by that, he made a choice to choose his family, to choose to be home and be with his family. Now, my hope is that he lives a long time at home, honestly, right? To show people that hospice is really not about the last few days of your life. It is about choosing a pathway that you want for yourself and how you want to live those last times when we're talking about quality instead of quantity. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this video is a video about, it was, you know, those feel-good stories at the end of the evening news every night. So this was a story, and I lit up, my husband thought I was crazy, right? I lit up when this story came up on the news, and I saved it to use for a lot of my lectures, because I think it illustrates how you have to be your own advocate. I hope that when I'm done with my career, I have taught many, many doctors and many medical students and many medical residents to be okay to have this conversation and to offer this just as important an option for patients, just like other medical care. But I'm not there yet, right? We're too far from that right now. But I hope that I could look back on my career and say that I've done that. But this woman in this story was an advocate for herself, and this is what I'm hoping you all to be at some time in the future.
We end tonight with a lesson in living life to the fullest, every minute, every mile. Here's David Begnaud.
Were you ever a beach girl before this?
No.
The story of 90-year-old Norma Bauerschmidt starts with an end-of-life decision.
They wanted to operate and everything right away. I said, no, we'll just leave it be.
It was uterine cancer. 2 days after that diagnosis, Norma's husband of 67 years, Leo, died.
I knew it went up here someplace.
Her son Tim and his wife Ramey were the only family she had left, and they lived on the road in an RV.
Tim says, well, it's either you come along with us or we'd have to put you in a nursing home, because I couldn't stay by myself.
She just sat there quietly for a minute and said, I think I'd like to come along. Ready to roll?
And so began the road trip with the Fab Four: Tim, Norma, Ramey, and Ringo, the dog. They left Presque Isle, Michigan, and made it to Rushmore. She saw the presidents, and then Old Faithful at Yellowstone, gazed into the Grand Canyon, looked down on Florida from a hot air balloon, had her first pedicure in Georgia, and indulged in more beer and cake than she can remember. Did you think you'd be having this much fun at 90?
No.
Well, pop a wheelie for her, Mom?
Sure, why not?
I've never seen her smile this much. This is how I show her the stars at night.
And tomorrow I will be teaching my kids about you.
Ramey has been posting about their trip on Facebook, and now more than 200,000 people are getting to know Norma.
You're a sensation.
Her own son is getting to know her too.
This has allowed me to have discussions I never thought I'd have with my mom. And to find out things like you found out, where she and my dad met.
You didn't know your parents met at a bar until she told us?
No.
Norma and crew have logged more than 7,000 miles so far, but there's still a lot left on her to-do list.
They give me a new lease on life, I should say.
You think you'll live the rest of your life on the road?
Yes, I probably will.
Hi, Norma.
Hi, Norma.
And if you see her along the way, wave, because she will make you smile. David Begnaud, CBS News, driving Miss Norma in St. Augustine, Florida.
Amazing, right? So again, the theme for tonight is that it's about her choosing how she wanted to live her life. Probably some surgeon would have said, she's this crazy old lady who just decided she didn't want to do the surgery that I wanted to do. I bet you there's some surgeon out there that would have that response to this video. But what's important to realize is that she chose a pathway that was right for her. And she did things in her life that she never would have done before otherwise, if she hadn't made that choice, right? This is about her choosing, even if the time is short, how I wanted to spend the time. And sometimes I wish that all doctors, when sitting down with you with a serious diagnosis that have to really make serious decisions, that they offer this as an option, but unfortunately they don't always. And so I want you to say, it may not be right for everybody to say, you know what, I'm not doing surgery, right? Some people still feel that that's important, and that's okay too. But to understand the outcomes that would come about and kind of balancing how that's going to look like in your life. Because she seemed pretty cool, right? And she had a really great time. And I think she lived on the road for about 15 months before she got really sick. And she ended up going on hospice actually in Seattle State, and she passed away there when they were on the road. But she lived 15 months, and she probably wouldn't have ever done that if she went for that surgery. Now, would she have lived longer than 15 months? It's possible, but it's a balance of what that quality of life would have been like for her. We just won't know, but she chose that pathway. So the next video is, again, kind of giving us perspective, is that people think that hospice is like, oh, I just sit and do nothing. There's no value to me if I'm on hospice. It just means I'm going to sit in the bed and no one's going to talk to me and I'm just going to be by myself, right? So this gentleman, he lives in a long-term care facility. There's no audio. You just have to read the words on the video for this. It'll tell us a little bit about his story.
Sometimes say you gotta have a coffee break.
Now, I hope everyone finds that value and that purpose in life like Maury did, right? And that Miss Norma did. Yes, I understand some people may say, oh, but they're in their 90s, and so that's okay, right? And someone may be younger and still have that same process. And I want us to be okay to say that that's okay too. That it doesn't have to be because we're old and gray and there's no other option, and I live this very long life and I'm okay to pass away. There may be other circumstances where we won't live into our 90s. And I still want you to feel like you can say this to your doctors, to your loved ones, to be able to tell them what you want and don't want if you get really sick. And that doesn't mean you have to stop all treatment like hospice, right? There may be those steps along the way that you can choose what you want and what you don't want. And so the next two slides, the first slide is how I end almost, how I end almost every talk when I talk to older people, younger people, to really protect yourselves, right? So when we talk about having these conversations, the most important thing, obviously, is to have this conversation with your loved one, for the person who you would want to help you make these decisions, because at some point you might be too sick or may not have the ability to express your wishes. So the important thing is to have a conversation. And once you have a conversation, to kind of put it on paper. So this is just an example of what's called a living will, whereas it's general information about what you wouldn't want or want in some point. But what's most important to me as the doctor is not the bottom, which is what you want and don't want, is the top. And the top is the healthcare proxy form. So if you have your relationship, you're not married, you have 15 children, you have no children, you have only friends, whomever, whatever your circumstances is, I want you to think about who would be the best person in your stead if you were not able to make these kind of decisions and talk to the doctors, who you would want to make these decisions for you. Who do you trust to do that? And if it's not your spouse, or you have more than one child, it would be a very good idea to put it on paper, so that way you have on paper to protect you who legally can make decisions for you. And that's the most important thing about this form. Not the bottom, because the bottom, if you read through it, it's kind of legal mumbo jumbo. It really doesn't help us. I can't read this form and say, aha, I know exactly what Mrs. Smith wants me to do. I still need to talk to someone. I need to have this conversation with somebody, because I can't act upon the form on the bottom. But what's most important to protect yourself is that you have someone who you choose to make your own decisions, who know the value that you just decided through our last 40, whatever, half an hour we've been talking, right? Is you've created this environment in your own head, in conversations you've had, that you've really clarified the value system that you hold for your caregiving team. And now you need to have someone impart that for you to the medical team if you're not able to yourself. And then if you do have more specific decisions that you know you want, is the next slide is a form that I've hopefully shown some of you if you've been to some of my lectures. It's called a POST. It's a practitioner order for life-sustaining treatment. It's a form for someone who probably is at the end of their days. Usually it's recommended for someone who has a year or two left in terms of their life. Obviously, we don't know exactly, but just generally you're at toward the end of your life more than in the middle. And what it does is it provides a medical order to tell the doctors exactly what you want or don't want at the end of your days. It talks about resuscitation. It talks about artificial nutrition. It has a box for you to write anything generally that you want to talk about. And this is signed by you and your physician. So if you show up to an emergency room or this is sitting on your refrigerator and the EMS comes to your house, they will follow this based on exactly what you said. It also gives you the opportunity to pick someone, if you haven't already, as a healthcare proxy, and you could tell that healthcare proxy that they may or may not change the information on this form. If, let's say, you have someone who you trust to help make decisions, but certain decisions they may not agree with you, right? I deal with that all the time, is that you have a friend or a child who may have a little bit of different thoughts about what your wishes are at the end of the days. On this form, you can check off that you don't want them to be able to change it, and then they can't. They would have to follow your wishes based on the legality of this form. So this really protects a lot of people. It became legal in New Jersey in 2019. So we've had it for some time. Sorry, 2011. I'm sorry, there's another form to it. So we had this for some time, and it really is a good opportunity for us to protect people. This did a few iterations. I think this is the third version of the form in New Jersey, but it really provides an opportunity for you to have had all the conversations we've already talked about. Decide what's right for you. Am I pursuing more therapy, but I just want to focus on my symptoms and give some guidance as to what's important to me as a person? Or am I at a point where my illness is really going to take my life at a shorter time than I would have hoped, and I just want to focus on my symptoms and being with family and being out of the hospital? That's really the difference between, let's say, palliative care and hospice. And I think that next slide is the end. So I appreciate your attention. I hope that the videos help to illustrate to you kind of what I'm encouraging you to do as an advocate for yourself, to think about what's really important to me. There's a new buzzword in medicine about, patient-centered care. But if you never ask the question about what you're actually thinking, it is not patient-centered care. It's doctor-centered care who just saying buzzwords so that they make themselves feel good. It really should be you included in this conversation.